The Mauricewood Pit Disaster occurred on the 7th of September 1889. The pit at Glencorse, Midlothian, had been owned by the Shotts Iron Company Limited since 1875. The Scottish mining website has extensive information about the real event, and I've drawn freely from it in this talk. There's a contemporary narrative account and a report of the events and newspaper responses to it. These all serve to corroborate Crockett's own fictionalisation of the event and offer at times harrowing detail. For YouTube viewers, I'll link to these and the other online resources in the description box below. The events have also been more recently fictionalised by Dorothy Alexander in her novel The Mauricewood Devils of 2016, and it's well worth a read. But for now, the established facts are as follows. On September the 5th, 1889, a fire broke out in the Mauricewood colliery. Of the 70 miners underground at the time, 63 died in the fire. The youngest was only 13. The fire started at the 160 fathom level and spread rapidly, filling the mine with smoke. It was described in the papers as one of the most appalling mining disasters of recent years in the east of Scotland, suggesting it wasn't the only one. It's worth noting that the Mauricewood Pit disaster wasn't a single-day event, but rather it unfolded over several months, which must have been horrific for the families of the victims. 4 bodies were recovered almost immediately, and later on that day, rescue workers reached the 80 fathom level and recovered 2 more bodies. On the following day, 19 additional bodies were retrieved. The mine was shut on the 7th of September when smoke was again seen emerging from the pit, delaying further recovery efforts. The first set of funerals were held on the 8th of September and brought multitudes of visitors to the village. There were said to be around 10,000 spectators and mourners at the services. However, mine conditions were so dangerous that it wasn't until March the 16th, 1890, over 6 months after the disaster, that the final 36 bodies were recovered. We can only imagine the suffering and devastation to the families that this must have caused. While the cause of the Mauricewood Pit disaster was never clearly established, a key factor in the high death toll was the lack of a second opening in the mine. This was a clear violation of the law, which required double shafts to ensure safety. The law stipulated that openings must be separated by a distance of at least 15 yards. The Shotts Iron Company's failure to comply with these regulations raised serious legal and ethical questions, as it became clear that this negligence contributed significantly to the tragedy. Crockett, who was the Freekirk Minister for Penicuik, and who had been in the ministry for less than a year at the time of the event, was profoundly moved by it. It stuck with him through the rest of his life and formed the basis of several of his later literary works. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, Crockett played a crucial role. He led the Fields End Mission, whose mission workers provided essential support to the bereaved families in Shottstown, offering temporary relief, food and clothing. He also wrote letters to significant people, including Robert Louis Stevenson, asking for money to help with the relief effort. The mission's efforts were part of a broader community response, where local leaders and churches came together to organise relief and raise funds. On September the 9th, 1889, a meeting was held at Mr. McKerrow's church, convened by local leaders, including Mr. Cowan of Beeslack, to coordinate the collection of funds for the victims' families. The community, along with supporters from Edinburgh and beyond, raised approximately £20,000, which was a substantial sum at that time. The money was managed by a committee that ensured it was distributed fairly to the widows and children left behind by the disaster. Crockett was instrumental in making sure that the unmarried partners of miners who died also received assistance, something the company was unwilling to do. The Shotts Iron Company did contribute to raising funds, giving a £500 donation. However, given that the tragedy was likely caused by their own negligence, this seems a fairly poor response. Certainly Crockett was unimpressed by the company, and he fictionalised it more than once, using his experiences to inform his writings, including his 1907 novel, Vida, the Iron Laird of Kirktown, and other stories like In the Matter of Incubus and The Respect of Drowdle. The disaster highlighted the dangerous working conditions in mines during the late 19th century. Crockett himself wrote to the Scotsman emphasising the need for more frequent and thorough inspections of mines to prevent such tragedies. And the Mauricewood Pit Disaster serves us as an example of the broader issues faced by miners, including the lack of safety measures and the prioritisation of profit over human life. Crockett first wrote about the disaster in 1894 as a short story titled In the Matter of Incubus and Co., published in a volume of Vox Clamantium, The Gospel of the People, by Andrew Reed. A subsequent story, The Respect of Drowdle, which recites the mine to the west of Scotland, was published as a magazine short story sometime before publication as part of the Stickett Minister's Wooing in 1900, and it offers a more oblique mention to the Mauricewood Pit disaster. But it does show that the story and the injustice still had a grip on Crockett. It was a grip that he never let go, because in 1907 he revisited it once more, making it a central plot feature of his serial work in The People's Friend that year, Vida, the Iron Laird of Kirktown. This was then published in novel form. The Incubus Company is clearly a fictionalisation of the Shotts Iron Company, and the novel is an interesting combination of sociological exploration and romance. We should be aware that Crockett wrote for the popular market, and I think we should also give him credit for how much of an original voice he's still able to give in this context. In Vida, he explores the societal impacts of capitalism and industrialisation, using the pit disaster as a backdrop. The novel delves into themes of worker safety, the ruthless nature of capitalist practices, and the emotional toll on those living in industrial towns. It also contrasts the lives of those above and below ground, highlighting the emotional and physical costs of mining life. Crockett provides a critique of emerging capitalist practices, portraying them as careless and often detrimental to workers' well-being. The novel also touches on the theme of factionalisation within society, using the fictional town of Kirktown as a microcosm to explore the waning influence of religion and the rise of business interests. This reflects the societal shifts occurring at the time as communities grappled with the changes brought about by industrialisation and capitalism. Another strand of the story illustrates the contemporary political situation in Europe in the decade before the First World War. We should remember that Crockett was writing contemporary fiction. It's not a nostalgia piece. It's a novel which challenges the social, political and economic times in which it's written. The Mauricewood Pit disaster isn't well remembered, and Vida even less so. However, the novel is significant, not just for its fictionalisation of the tragedy. It also features the first car chase in fiction. And the spy element associated with the car chase from Dalmellington to Newton Stewart in the book, In Pursuit of Foreign Spies, is perhaps more influential on Buchan's novel The 39 Steps than has ever been acknowledged. I'm not accusing Buchan of plagiarism here, simply noting that Crockett's story predates Buchan's by nearly a decade. I think it's interesting to reflect on what stories and what versions of truth get remembered over time. And this is one reason I continue to bang the drum for Crockett, because his connections to his contemporary world are, I believe, as significant as they are overlooked.